Hey, welcome to Dan's Model Works. And this is, I believe, part 4 of building the racer's wedge. And we're at the clutter zone at the moment. And there's some bits and pieces of condor laying around. And we've got a couple of engine halves there. But today I feel like working on the racer's wedge. So let's get this out of the way. And one of the things we need to do is we need to modify the sides of the wedge, because if we look at our big wheels here, you can see they just barely fit inside those wheel wells. So I think I've already established that I want to increase the size of my wheel wells by about 1/4 of an inch, and I'm gonna enlarge it towards the rear, because the front axle, of course, is our powered axle, and it's actually a very short wheelbase compared to the overall size of the vehicle. So I'd rather shove things towards the back than the front. Now I've just made a mark 1/4 of an inch back, and the idea is I've just placed, get it out of the shadow here, just placed my wheels on there, and I think that's going to be what I'm looking to do here. There's just enough space that you could get a scale hand in between the wheels and the wheel wells themselves. I used a Sharpie to indicate where I want to enlarge it to, and all I did is I used the other side of the bodywork. I laid it on top in order to transfer that line. Okay, I've done the surgery on the right hand side. Now I'm still going to have to do something with the trim around the wheel well, because this has a very slight flare to it, which of course I've lost over here. So I still had to kind of come up with a solution to restore that. But this is one step that's kind of been holding me back, because until I can finish assembling the body of the ramp of the wedge, I can't mock up where this front axle is going to have to go. And changing length of the drive shaft is no real big deal, but installing the leaf springs and everything for the front axle, that's got to be done fairly soon. One thing I didn't mention earlier that's going to be a slight complication, as you can see, the enlarged wheel well interferes with these lugs on the back side, and there's basically a lower piece that fits in here, so I might need to modify that, cut that back a bit when I do the final assembly on the wedge portion. Here is that lower piece I was talking about, and it fits underneath the main body, kind of like this. And I'm assuming that this should fit flush at the back here. And this gives you a spot to mount your taillights or whatever onto. And if we look at it from the side, there seems to be a little bit of a taper. It gets tighter right here. And even if you flip this the other way, like this, you still end up with the same taper. And I'm not exactly sure which way it goes, whether it goes this way or this way. This way seems to be a little bit neater, so I think that's what I'm going to do, is mount it this way. So I will have to trim a little bit off of the front here so that I clear our enlarged wheel wells. I decided to remove the same 1/4 inch from this panel as I did from the sides of the truck. And that should actually give me a little bit more space than I need. So I've glued the sides on. This part here is still able to slide in and out. I'll glue that in after the sides have set up. But really it should just go thusly. And as far as I can tell, the ramps that clip onto the back, they're just supposed to slide in here. It's my assumption. And maybe they've got, I don't know, some sort of tailgate here or something. But they've got all this space here, of course, that they can also put stuff in. Although, it seems to me if they hit the accelerator hard, they could end up with everything flying out the back of it. I don't know, I might put a little lip on here. But I'm pretty sure this is the underside, because I remember these same sort of tabs were under the camper body. So in our last episode, I showed the engine basically assembled, and I'm just going to give it a coat of gloss blue paint. Might not be an exact match for Ford engine blue, but I think I really am going to grimy this up, because after all, this represents basically what Willie and Herman have put together out of parts from a junkyard. But at any rate, one thing that I didn't cast was the exhaust manifolds. And so they've been glued onto this little plastic tray, and I'm going to start building up the mold for that. But at any rate, so that I can see, how this is going to look, I'm going to get this painted up. The paint, by the way, is Model Flex Grand Trunk Western Blue. Goes back to my days of doing model railroading. So I did cheat a little bit. I didn't show you me putting the second coat on. But I think it looks as good as any engine that I've ever just assembled out of regular plastic in a kit. And if we look really careful here, you can see the Ford logo molded into the tops of the valve covers. So next step for this engine, of course, I'll probably paint the oil pan black, and the transmission probably some sort of a steel or gunmetal color. But looks like we have a power plant for our ramp truck. And here's our engine with a preliminary coat of paint. You saw me put the blue on, painted the oil pan semi-gloss black, and the transmission, I believe I used gunmetal for that. Now I still have to put the exhaust manifolds on here, and I haven't even cast those up yet, so it's going to be a few more days before I can get those on and move ahead on the engine. And I mentioned that I still needed exhaust manifolds. So I basically used the ones that were from the AMT kit, basically because they go along with this particular engine. So here is the mold that I made. And here are the manifold parts before being cleaned up. So as you can see, there's some flash that I need to file away, and I need to sand them down, but I think they turned out not too bad. I probably poured a little bit more into this particular mold than I needed to, because I'm going to have to sand all that down. And of course, as I've mentioned before, you probably should use some sort of a face mask to keep from inhaling the dust from this resin whenever you sand it. And here's my exhaust manifolds, cleaned up. A little bit of a dent there I might need to fill up. But otherwise, I think they turned out pretty good, actually better than I thought. I've got some stuff mounted here. I've got the exhaust manifolds on, and This little guy here is the starter, and of course that's our oil filter there. And of course I'm going to be painting the oil filter orange because that's what my brain figures they should be painted. I know they come in all kinds of different colors. And I have also been working on, let's see if we can focus in on this. Come on. Come on. Okay, there's our distributor cap. And I've drilled the holes. Now, unlike the hot rod, where what I just did was I twirled a number 11 X-Acto blade, what I did this time was, this is a 1/64th. Good luck focusing on that. This is a 1/64th drill bit, and it's actually too small. My pin vise does not come together tight enough for a drill bit this small, so I had to put it in this X-Acto handle. Actually, I think it's an Excel handle, but at any rate, that's how I was able to drill the holes in the distributor cap. And I also drilled the holes in the engine block with that as well. So hopefully the spark plug wires will go a whole lot easier on this build than it did on the Model T hot rod. We will see. And here is our engine, finally fully assembled. The fan, I believe, came from a 1970s Cougar, as did the pulley assembly. Well, the pulley assembly actually might have come from the Ford C-Series truck. I basically used it because if we look at it from the side here, you can see how, I mean, usually on these engines, you know, one pulley sticks out a bit farther from the other, and the spacing matched almost exactly, and the step was almost exactly what I needed, so I kind of took the lazy way out and used it. The alternator is a little bit low, but I'm not too worried about this, because after all, remember, Willie and Herman, this is a junkyard engine that they rebuilt, so a lot of what they did is kind of rat rodish in that let's use what we got. And the spark plug wires are a little more springy than the last time because I used a different material. This is a monofilament, but given that it's all going to be under the doghouse and kind of squished down anyway, I think that looks all right. So the engine at least is finally ready to go. I'll give it a black wash to gross it up a little bit later. Now, despite the fact that I have to not only mount the rear suspension using leaf springs, but I also have to kind of engineer a tag axle behind it. The part of the suspension that I'm really leery about, the part that I'm really nervous about, is the twin I-beam suspension in the front. Mainly because it's fiddly. I suppose it's the best term for it. Fiddly. And on the vans, as opposed to the pickup trucks, it's even more unusual in that on the pickup trucks, so far as I can tell, for the axle with wheel on this side, it's actually mounted all the way onto this side of the suspension. On the vans, this weird looking piece that drops down here, I suppose you could call it a K-member, although it's not really shaped like that. Basically, the I-beams hook onto that. So the I-beam for this side mounts here. The I-beam for this side mounts here. So the I-beams are not quite as long. So as you can see, there's a lot of little bits and pieces that are going to have to go together. And of course, who's to say whether or not my cast parts are really the exact dimensions they should be? We shall see. I think I'm going to start by mounting the coil springs to the coil spring mounts here. Now, as you can see, there's a little nubby here on the top, which actually should engage into this yellow spot here. Well, obviously, the yellow spot is the top of the original coil spring part, which is long gone. So you know what? I'm thinking I'm just going to snick that off and glue it on flat. I'll just file that down, and I don't think there's really much to be gained by actually drilling that out and having that fit into that spot. Okay, there's our coil springs glued in place. They don't look nearly long enough, but they're the same size as the parts that I copied off the other van, so we will see how all this goes together. I've discovered a problem. Now you can see here is the I-beam for the passenger side, and it's supposed to mount on here and then go across. As you can see, there's no way in heck that's coming anywhere close to that spring. So something is wrong. So here is the AMT Econoline frame, the one which the suspension parts I have copied is designed to work with. And if we put one over the other, that's not bad. They're basically the same shape. Well, they should be. Same thing as if we look at it this way. They both go up in the same places. However, if I put them nose to nose, now looking at the frames nose to nose, you can see the spring perch on the AMT frame there on the left does not go nearly as high as the spring perch on the MPC kit. There's probably 7 or 8 millimeter difference. And that's almost the full amount that we're dealing with here. So I'm going to have to probably end up doing some scratch building of some parts here in order to get this to work. I've decided that I need to make a detour here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to assemble the front suspension parts of the AMT van. And then I'm going to use that as a template for assembling my hybrid parts on the MPC frame. Because I don't know really how far apart my wheelbase should be. There's all kinds of things I don't know. And if I put together this front end, then I can use my cast parts and I can use scratch build parts and things in order to get this chassis to match this one. So I've put together the parts of the AMT frame, as you can see on the bottom. Now all I have to do is make my hybrid parts on the MPC frame up above match that. Overall, things are very similar between the frames, but the MPC frame is definitely finer in outline, although not necessarily better in detail. Well, it took some hours of cajoling, but I've managed to get my recast parts to basically be set up much like the stock parts. There are some minor differences. One of the big differences is you can see how big the springs are in the AMT kit, and in order to use the same spring perch, I literally had to put another half spring in there. And I was debating, should I make the spring perches lower and go with the springs that I thought were probably too short, or go with these ones that are too long. And then I thought, well, by the time I get all of this together, you're really going to have a hard time seeing how tall those springs are. So I just decided to go with the longer springs and make them work. So I'm now at the point where normally with a model you wouldn't be gluing the wheels on this soon, but unfortunately I have to so that I can nail down the stance of the front of the van and I can put the back axle on and everything like that and get them to agree. As I mentioned earlier, I possibly should have moved the supports for the coil springs down a little bit, because the coil springs are probably about 50% longer than they should be, but although I think when we get it all together, that's not going to be noticeable. I'm more concerned as to whether the truck has the sort of stance that it should have. One of the things I'm going to have to do is put this on. I'm fairly happy with how the wheels sit inside the wheel well. However, the cab leans a little down at the back here. So I need to put a shim back here to get it to sit right, which is fine. And I'm going to have to do that before I can start working on locating my rear axle, the live axle. Because I can't figure that out till I can put the body temporarily on. Then for that, this needs to be sitting level. So that needs to get done. Okay, we're still a little down at the back of the cab, but we're starting to get into the neighborhood we need to be in. And the frame is still a smidge low at the back as well. But at least I've established, if we move up, you can see I've put a little bit of green marker on the frame. And that's where we need our rear axle, the powered one, to be located, so I can start fooling around with that. In preparation for getting my live axle all set up and the suspension done, I figured it would probably be easiest to actually mount the wheels onto the axle, so I'm not trying to hold them in place while I'm trying to hold everything else together. And as you can see, I put an X in the back of my wheel to drill a hole. Now I want to say that this axle is not a copy of the axle from the AMT Econoline. It is not. This axle is actually from the Revell / Monogram Super Duty. I'm actually not sure if it's from the 250 or the 350. I don't know. It just was an easier cast. Basically, I'd made a mold of the AMT one from the Econoline, and gluing it together was just a nightmare. And this axle went together a whole lot better. Now, does this really matter that I'm using the axle from the Super Duty? Well, let's recall that the whole idea of this van that Willie and Herman are building is they're building it using junkyard parts. So it's quite possible that they decided to go with an axle from a Super Duty pickup truck just because it probably has a higher weight classification to it, like a higher capacity. Or maybe the axle that they had on the Econoline, maybe it was pooched and this one was just happened to be handy. But at any rate, that's what I'm using. I'm using this. And actually, I like this axle better. It seems to have some better detail to it. So don't get excited. It's not nearly as far along as it looks. Just some more mocking up. The body itself is a little low over those back wheels. That's going to come up just a bit. As you can see, the cab now sits level, and the wheel is actually higher up in the wheel well than it was before. And basically what I did is, instead of adding more shims to the back, I basically removed a little bit from the floor pan until I was able to get the cab to come down in the front. And I think it looks a whole lot better now. So I haven't actually mounted any of my rear suspension yet. This is just me figuring out how things are looking. I'm close to doing the rear suspension, but I think this episode has gone on long enough. So, thanks for watching, and until next time, just keep on modeling.